Hello, so this video is all about the Canon 50mm 1.4 USM EF lens, and I've had a love-hate relationship with this lens for many years. I think I'm on my fourth version of it now. It was first launched in 1993. I've owned a version of this lens pretty much full-time since about 2001, and I'm just going to show you some of the pictures that I've taken with it over the years to give you an idea of what I've been shooting, and then I'll come back to talk to you about some of my experiences of owning it and using it, and some of the good things about it, some of the bad things about it, all that good stuff. So here we go. So prior to the 1.4, I was using the nifty 50, 1.8 Mark 1, I think it was back then. And that was always okay, but I wanted something that had a better maximum, a faster maximum aperture, maybe better autofocus, and maybe had improved optical quality. And this kind of coincided with the launch of Canon's first full frame digital SLRs, I believe. Now, I'm not going to go into too much of a comparison between the 1.4 and the nifty 50s, or the bigger lenses like the Sigma Art lens or the 1.2 Canon L lens. I think they're very different beasts and they occupy different places in the lineup for me anyway. And these things are subjective. You know, everyone has their different opinions about these things. This is just my opinion based on my experience. And so if you have a thought about any of these things, leave it in the comments, because it's good for everybody to get a kind of feel of how everybody else feels about these things. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. You know, it's still one of the smallest photography YouTube channels on the planet. You can be here first, you can be one of the pioneers. Subscribe and send me a message. I'd love to hear from people, and thank you to everybody that's already subscribed. Anyway, my experience of using these things. So typically I will do most of my shoots using Canon L zooms, a variety of them depending on the requirements. And so they do most of the heavy lifting in terms of the optics for most of my shoots. So the 50mm lens, even though it's one of my favourite focal lengths, kind of becomes almost secondary, and that's why it's important for me to have one available that's nice and light but still has that 1.4 thing going on in case I need it, just for those very special 50mm moments. And so I'm going to talk about kind of my experience from the beginning. So version 1 of this lens I bought, and it was okay, but it was never sharp wide open at 1.4. It was okay at 1.8 or f2, but at 1.4 it was muzzy. I tried to get it calibrated, never successfully managed to get a sharp image from that thing at 1.4. I used it successfully for a couple of years and then it fell apart. You'll notice a trend is going to emerge here. Number 2 came along. Number 2 was brilliant. It was sweet lens. It was sharp wide open at 1.4 on all of my different cameras. No calibration required. It's always a little bit misty at 1.4, as these lenses tend to be. They're never going to be at their optical perfection wide open. You're always sort of testing it to its limits of its capabilities. But it was okay, and I used it and it got me out of lots of different problems, and was a great lens, and we shot, you know, I shot lots of successful assignments with it, but then it fell apart. Version number 3 came along, but I can't remember whether that was sharp or not, because I ended up dropping it onto the floor of a marble floor of a villa in, I think, Turkey, and it just kind of fell apart. Here's the trend. That was my fault, obviously. Number 4 is this one, or I think it's this one. There may have been another one in between that I can't remember, but this one's been good. This is again sharp wide open with zero calibration required on any of the big cameras, like even the Mark 4. It's nice and sharp wide open. Again, it has that slight misty thing, which I think is almost a characteristic of this lens, or actually most fast primes when they're wide open. They're kind of sharp, but there's this kind of, what would you call it, like a misty kind of slight halo, kind of ever so slightly ethereal look to the pictures, which I don't dislike, so long as they're primarily sharp in the center. And this is one of those lenses. Again, though, it's starting to fall apart. And that is the trend, that these things I think have questionable build quality. And you could say that it's my fault because I'm a bit heavy-handed with my gear. And that might be partly to blame, but also it is a known issue. And you know, there are a few fixes. I think it's a plastic lens, so it's got a metal lens mount, but it's plastic insides. And I think that basically some of the plastic parts degrade over time. There is a fix that you can do, and I've done it myself, where you take the lens apart, strip it back, and then there's a plastic thing that I think you can either squeeze or pull back or twist. I can't remember, something like that. Did it and it worked, but you know, it's not an elegant solution. I don't know if I'd recommend it to people to do, and I think it worked for a little while and then went wrong again and fell apart again, so I ended up getting a new one anyway. That's not to say that every lens is going to fall apart. I think if they're well looked after and not used kind of on a daily basis of professional use, then they may well last for a lifetime. You know, who knows? The next negative thing about this lens is what I kind of talked about briefly, is that it's inconsistent. You know, you will get a good version and it will be sharp and it will be good, and then the next version sort of the same lens in the same lineup might not be so good. It might be muzzy. And in my experience, when you get a muzzy one, you can calibrate it and you could kind of send it away and you can try, but you never seem to quite get it to be perfect. And others may have different experience of this again. So that inconsistency is a problem. You know, I said before, it's a love-hate relationship because there are other problems as well. It has chromatic aberration, it has fringing, it has distortion, has all of those things that you don't really want to hear about in a lens, but they can all be corrected. And so long as you understand the nature of that, then you know, if you're expecting something that is optically absolutely perfect in every possible way, then you would be ever so slightly disappointed. But in some ways that does add character to the lens as well. It's, you know, this lens does have a nice feel to the images from it. It has a nice look, and I like that. I'm not just looking for the technical perfection. The look is important to me as well. So those are the negatives. Build quality, the inconsistency of the models, that you never know what you're going to get. You know, the fact that they can be a bit soft wide open, the fact that you get some fringing, chromatic aberration, distortion, which can all be corrected. Those are the negatives. Okay, so what are the positives about it? Well, firstly, it occupies a unique space because it's so nice and light and small. And I've talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, but the fact that you can put this in your pocket is really cool to me anyway. That's really valuable. And the fact it's cheap, you know, you can buy these things new for I think sort of £250, secondhand for probably 100 to 150 pounds upwards. My advice would be, if you're going to buy one, is to not to buy a battered one, that's for sure. If you're going to buy a second-hand one, make sure it's really well looked after and actually all works properly, and really test out the focusing to make sure, because that's where you can see when the build quality starts to degrade. It's in the focusing that the issue happens. So make sure that it all works if you're looking at a second-hand one. Another positive is that it just gets the job done. You know, there's so many occasions with lenses where, you know, I look back over the ownership of using them and I think, I'm so glad that I've had that lens, because it's just got me out of a tricky situation when I'm in really low light, or I really want to throw something really out of focus, or achieve some of those things that you can do with a 50mm lens. And this one's always been there, and it's always delivered and always done the job. And yeah, there has been a little bit of inconsistency between the models, and there has been a little bit of mistiness and a little bit of annoyance at not being able to shoot wide open on some of the versions, but that can be true of most fast primes as well, depending on which versions you get and how you use them. Okay, so to summarize, and there's one more negative thing that I forgot to mention, that is that the autofocus, it's quite slow, a bit noisy, and not that accurate. It's a 30-year-old lens. It's not the newest kid on the block. It's not going to be the fastest, but you can make that work under most circumstances. And again, just to summarize, I hope that I haven't either turned you off of this lens and convinced you it's terrible, or convince you that it's the best thing in the world, because it's certainly neither of those things. It's a compromise lens, and understanding the nature of it and how it sits into the lens lineup for me and my workflow, and possibly for you as well, is kind of the key to understanding whether a lens like this is right for you. You know, so many people are ready to write these things off or to say that they're just the best thing in the world, and I kind of want to give a bit more of a balanced view than that, you know, like I said, it's a love-hate lens. And I really hope that this has been in some way useful for you. Please do leave me a comment if you have any thoughts, and thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.